Sometimes just a handful of people with limited resources can make a big difference.
Most people don't realize that, say, their neighbors down the street might be hungry because they just don't see it.
Any man that goes out and do a 40-hour-a-week job and expects some type of salary for it and don't get it is a very hurtful feeling.
From our backyard in the U.S. to faraway places around the globe, find your voice as we search for the answers that will change the world. This boy is growing up to be a singer because he lives in a community that supports his lifestyle. These businesses exist because of a community they in turn support. And all of this only exists because of the interrelatedness of poverty.
Sometimes it's tough, sometimes it's complicated, but if it were going to be easy, we wouldn't ask. These are what we call the big questions. Leading our conversation today is ethicist, author, and Professor Patricia Werhane, who holds the Wicklander Chair of Business Ethics and is the Managing Director of the Institute for Business and Professional Ethics at DePaul University. My friend, author, and professor, Laura Pincus Hartman, founder of a new model of education in Haiti, the School for Choice. And I'm your host, Kim Clark, a member of the College of Communication at DePaul University and a documentary filmmaker. Bangladesh is a smaller country just east of India, and despite corruption, frequent natural disasters, and overpopulation, Bangladesh is making solid steps forward. Usually, when we give $1 to charity, we do exactly that. We give $1 to one person at one time. That same dollar, when given as a microloan, can be used by one person, paid back, used by another, and so on, helping dozens of people over time. Let's take a look.
One way of empowering the poor is through microlending programs. Microlending grants the poor access to very small loans, which can mean the difference between owning a business and surviving on one meal a day. Loans usually range between $3 and $150. In this rural community, women form groups that work with a social worker to learn about money management, assets, and the importance of savings. The group creates its own bank that votes on loan distribution, insures the loans, and requires weekly payments and savings. Each woman has a passbook in which all of her payments and deposits are recorded every week. Initial loans are very small. And once they are repaid, the woman can apply again for a larger loan. As she's building credit, she's also learning about how she can increase her income. Rarely is a loan in default. Women enrolled in the Village Savings Program meet in groups of about 15 to 30 people and elect officers. They convene weekly to discuss their problems and suggest solutions. Each woman commits to saving about 5 taka, which is about 3 cents every week, in a bank account secured by the organization. Their funds bill securely, with interest in their savings, a rare privilege in this rural area. With this financial responsibility, women can become more involved in the family's future. The loans are funded initially by Partners in Sustainable Development International and eventually by the Village Savings Program. Individuals can secure loans of up to $125 for purchase of goats, land, housing improvements, and small business initiatives. The loans are repaid over the course of a year, often with profits by the entrepreneurial ventures that would have otherwise not existed. With careful vetting and a robust savings program, over 32,000 microloans have been issued by PSDI to date, with a repayment rate of 98%.
That repayment rate is amazing. And for the three of us, we talk about microloans often, but let's just, and for everyone's benefit, let's just kind of define it, talk about what's the size of a microloan and what is it used for?
Microlending was started in Bangladesh, actually, by Muhammad Yunnus, who's a Nobel Prize economist. And his idea was he looked around Bangladesh and saw all these poor people and saw Bangladesh getting all this foreign aid, and he asked, where does the money go? Well, of course, he knew where the money went, right in the pockets of people. So he decided to start lending money, very small loans. His first loan was $28 to a woman who's making these beautiful bamboo chairs. And he said, how much do you make on a bamboo chair? And she said, I make 2 cents. Oh, he said, that's impossible. They're beautiful. Well, she said, I have to borrow money from the money lender at 200%. Now, she was illiterate, and she knew what interest rate he was paying. Well, he said, what if I lent you $28 at 12%?
Right.
Perfect. And that got him started.
And he took it out of his own pocket.
Yes, of course.
Right.
Yes. So he started the Grameen Bank of Bangladesh with the motto, only to lend to people who have no capital, no money, no property at all. Now, some of you have been to business school. You know that's not what we teach in business schools, right? You never lend money to anybody who doesn't have capital. He lends only to people who have no capital, and that's the principle behind microlending.
And is the dollar amount still around?
The second goes between $20 and $100 to $150.
But not much more than that.
Usually not. And the first loan is just this, and he also secondly lends only to women. Why? Because unfortunately, fellows, women tend to pay it back and tend to spend the money on something that will help their children. Men, I heard to say, tend to do a little other things. And the third thing he does.
Men drink the money.
They drink the money.
Stop.
Okay. They do.
Well, anyway, let me finish. So the third rule
Not
is
all men
drink.
Most
The third
Add
rule
that.
is that you lend to groups of women, so that when they lend to us, then if I lend to Laura, then
Wow.
she'll pay me back because we're friends, and she's my cousin,
I don't drink.
and she doesn't drink. So the lends are to groups of people, and then the idea is you will always pay back, and you will save a little bit of money. So every participant in a micro-lending program, a good one, has a savings account. And fourth, the money has to be spent on something that makes money. You can't get a new sari, you can't even get food for your children. You have to go out and have a goat or a sewing machine or a little field of farming or a fishery or something that will make money. And then when you make money, of course, you get to keep the profits. And then you can use that for a new house, for sending your children to school, for getting better clothes, and so on.
And there's these groups of women there's peer pressure in that.
Of course, peer pressure and paying back.
We took part in a roundtable discussion with Professor Mohammed Yunnus at DePaul University's Lincoln Park campus in Chicago.
It's good to be back in Chicago.
The discussion centers around Professor Yunnus's models for microlending and his approach to social business. We talked also about the Grameen Bank, with which he won the Nobel Peace Prize.
The bank lends out over $1.5 billion a year. We have something like 8.3 million borrowers, 2,600 branches. 97% of the shares of the bank are owned by the borrowers. They decide the policy of the bank. All this money comes from with its own system, so it doesn't take money from outside. Each branch is supposed to become self-reliant in terms of funds. Right from the beginning, they have to use their own money to lend money to the poor people.
Grameen Bank has taken over 6 million families out of poverty. And the little PSDI, which we're talking about,
Right.
is a nonprofit organization that also practices microlending.
Right.
The one difference is they start with people who are too poor to get a microloan. Imagine.
Right.
These are people who are lucky to have one meal a day,
Right.
have no roof on their head, and are so poor they can't even imagine sending their children to the free government school.
And when we went there, we a meal a day when we shot this video was a ball of rice and this stuff that looked kind of like okra.
Yeah.
And it was mixed together. That was the one meal that everybody ate, and everybody ate the same meal every day.
There are some challenges. This is really extraordinary. I mean, microloans are just extraordinary means to allow people living in poverty to move just a little bit further forward. But there are some challenges, and as we move forward with our conversation, I want you to keep both sides in mind. So
Challenges meaning problems?
there's some problems, some hurdles
Like a
with
regular person would say problems.
Yes, thank you. But so I just want us all to keep some of these in mind. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in microloan programs, but that you can create a microloan program in order to avoid these hurdles. So for instance, sometimes the proposed business, and I call business loosely because it might be just we allow the person enough money in order to fund a goat so that then they can get the milk in order to then go sell it in the marketplace and support their family. So the goat is their business. But sometimes the proposed business is not sufficiently vetted in order to make sure that whatever they want to spend the money on is going to bring in some money.
Yeah.
So we have some problems with that.
Or the goat could get sick.
Yes.
But one of the things that we learned from Mohammed Yunnus is that you have managers who manage these loans and teach people how to make their businesses successful. So they go in at least every 2 weeks and check on the goat, check on the farm,
Right.
check on the chickens, and make sure that this is really going to be a viable
My
loan.
point is that not all programs are Grameen. We need to ensure that every single program has sufficient credibility and viability.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that every single program does sufficiently vet each of these, that there is sufficient training
Yes.
of the individuals. These are people who don't know how to add, and yet, yes, they understand what 200% interest means. So we need to make sure that each of these elements that go into a viable and sufficient program are in place. And that's why people have some concerns about microloans. We just want to make sure that we identify each of the elements of a good program as we move forward with our conversation,
let me
which I
move
know that Kim
forward.
wants to do. There are a number of microloan groups. It's
A
not
lot.
just Grameen.
But the
I know
PSDI
that Kim
uses
wants to move forward.
the Yunnus model.
They do all
use
use
the
the
Yunnus
We'll
model. That's
continue
true.
after the next segment.
Once microlending systems have been established, many routes can be pursued to bring people out of poverty, including entrepreneurial startups and improvements to existing businesses. Let's take a look.
Microloans are often taken for the creation of small businesses and for making improvements or expansions on existing businesses. With a few US dollars, the borrowed sum can be leveraged for a great deal of uses. In response to Bangladesh's shrinking forest, many women raised trees on roadside plantations. The country's forested area had fallen from almost 18% to under 7%, causing soil erosion and changes in underground water levels. With women tending to almost 800 kilometers of planted saplings, the trees stand at a creative intersection between economic and environmental needs. These highly skilled women produce a variety of products, from equipment containers to irrigation pumps, that are sold in a variety of different markets. The foot-powered water pumps these women produce are sold for many different purposes, including irrigating crops and accessing fresh drinking water. One group of women acquired a loan to purchase a traditional loom, dating back hundreds if not thousands of years, and the machinery and supplies to make traditional grass-woven mats. They were given this loan because they had an ancestral knowledge of this process. As the business grows over the upcoming years, they will be able to take out another loan and purchase additional equipment and expand. This is more than a business. It's also a proud family tradition, continuing to be passed on to the next generation, and the next generation. These are literally the eyes of hope. This family is working toward a future free of poverty and working to leave a one-meal-a-day existence. Another profitable startup is the purchase and raising of chicks. With a small initial down payment made with a microloan, it pays substantial dividends once the chicks mature. For the person taking the microloan, this business is easy to learn, with a quick turnaround of profit. Social workers from the parent organization regularly check up on these startups, giving guidance to those who have not yet had previous business opportunities.
So we took a look at several really entrepreneurial ventures, which are separate from this microlending. It's kind of the next step, really.
Well, people who get microloans
Right.
then, of course, get themselves out of abject poverty, but they still live in poverty.
Right.
So this organization, this nonprofit, PSDI, and also Muhammad Yunnus, moves them into then small cottage industries. For example, fisheries, raising chickens, raising silkworms to make fabric,
Right.
embroidering on fabric. And of course, the mats become a much more of cottage industry. So the idea is to move people out of these into some more entrepreneurial ventures that will raise more money for themselves and their families.
Right.
And that's you will see that on the video. So the idea is not to just do microloans, but to do then these larger projects.
Right. And it kind of points to what Laura said before. You raise the bottom up a little bit. So you add a few cents at the very bottom of the pyramid, down there, and it really creates an income below the income.
Right. The challenge, though, at this level with entrepreneurs is that the people who are currently living in poverty, especially at the very lowest levels of poverty, are not very good at saving. There's no history of saving, no habit of saving, and there's a fear because there's such a history of poverty and a culture of poverty that has been their experience, that there's been no understanding and knowledge of how to save. And so research has shown that even when people's debts have been entirely paid off, that just one very small experience can put them right into that same level of poverty in which they found themselves originally.
So if they need capital for an illness or something happens or the goat gets sick, as I said before, they're back to zero.
Or unfortunately, many cultures have a lot of social pressure that keeps people in poverty. For instance, in some cultures in South America, there's a culture of celebration that as a social culture, when a child is born or when there's a family celebration, there's a lot of social culture. And if you don't celebrate that goal or that objective in your life, there's a social shame that you don't love your children enough, or you don't love your partner enough, that you haven't celebrated that with enough gala. And if you do, you can throw your family right back into that extreme level of poverty. So it's really unfortunate.
And in Bangladesh, one of the problems is paying the dowry of the women,
a similar
and
cultural
so
pressure.
that there's a lot of pressure to eliminate the dowry, because that will take most of the savings of most of these. But most micro-lending, at least in PSDI and the Grameen Bank of Mohammed Yunnus, requires you to save a little money, and the idea is to build up savings.
We're talking really a little
important.
money, like 3 cents a week.
I know, but that if you think about it.
Oh yeah, no, it's
save a lot.
fine.
But just to explain, and that
that's
gives you
fine. A little-
hope and optimism.
Whenever I see a problem, my inherent kind of response always, I see now looking back, was to create a business to solve a problem. In philanthropy world, we address all these social problems, which market doesn't address. That's why the philanthropy world was created. If market have addressed all this, philanthropy world was not needed to be there. In philanthropy, you solve the problem of education, employment, or whatever, healthcare, you donate money. And out of that donation, that program works for 1 year, 2 years, whatever money you give, then it stops. Then you have to raise again, continue. So even if you forget the other side, if you can improve on the philanthropy world by making some of this program which can become something which will cover the cost, so that every time you don't have to go around with the hat again. It sustains itself, it's sustainable. And we call it a social business. You are doing it not for making money, but for doing it, solving the problem in a business way rather than fundraising way.
They've got these things people called social workers that come in and keep track really of how far off the path or on the path people are.
Well, you saw earlier that everyone has a book, like a savings book, and they write in their loan and how much they saved every week. And that's checked on by the managers of the social workers. So there's actually keeping track as well.
But as Pat's explaining, can you imagine if we were all a solidarity group, this group of borrowers, and we each at one point or another needed to do this, and then we had one of these social workers, which engages a lot more one-on-one than you'd think of a social worker, and they have to come out, and we don't go into the city. They come out to the fields. It's a field worker operation, and they do it. It takes a lot of energy and effort on behalf of this microfinance institution, the MFIs. So it takes a lot of this effort. So consequently, the interest rates charged for these microloans are somewhat higher than you might imagine. And so people challenge the MFIs and say, oh my gosh, you're charging an arm and a leg. My experience and my knowledge happens to be Haiti. And so with particular organizations, they say, oh my gosh, this particular organization, you're charging so much interest for your loan. And they're really challenged on this, when in fact, It costs a lot of money to manage these loans because you take one person out to the field and they have to go out and they have to walk for miles and miles to go meet with your solidarity group and then to manage it and in order to keep these high rates of return. So it's really a balance here. You're paying sort of a high rate, not 200%, but you're paying more than you or I.
Probably 12 to 20%.
12 to 20%. Sometimes in some countries it's even more, but it's not 200%. And so you're paying kind of a high rate, but it's certainly much lower than 200%. And you have someone coming out, and they include an enormous amount of education, because one of the challenges I was going to mention is that you've never before written your numbers. You don't know how to add. You don't know how much to bring in week to week. So they're doing, it takes a lot of education.
No, it does. It absolutely does. Though we focused thus far on microlending in Bangladesh, the economic models we're discussing are applicable all over the globe. And we're finding success in diverse cultures in different contexts. In Haiti, where Laura does most of her work, we met an entrepreneur whose life has been changed by a microloan. And Laura and I talked to her. Have a look.
My name is Muriel Francois. When I received the money, I invested in 2 convection ovens. 1 year from now, my goal is to sleep more than 3 hours a night. I'd like to hire more people and train them. I'd like to hire more people and act in a managerial role. My dream is to one day create a franchise. If you have the desire to work, the poverty may be close by, but your soul will be intact.
Yes. Great.
The food smelled fantastic. It tasted great. I wish we could bring it back. Laura has something.
They were waiting for us to hand out some of the.
Yeah, we didn't bring anything back. Sorry.
No, we didn't. It was good. So what we're really wondering is whether you think that microlending, microfinance operations like this could work in the United States. You're shaking your head. Would you like to stand up and share with us your perspective? Can you share your name, please?
I'm David.
David,
and,
you say no, huh?
Off the top of my head, I think of 3 reasons why I don't think it would work in the U.S.
Okay.
I don't think that $28 to $150 goes very far in the U.S. That's number one. Number two is I don't think that we have the social structure and community really where shame and responsibility would get people to really act in a responsible manner, in a manner that's good for the community. In fact, I think communities are often people with a common interest on the internet and not necessarily people that live together and share a space. And the third reason is because we have government aid, and so I think that the whole concept of what you actually have to do to survive and to improve is vastly different because there are options.
Interesting, thank you. Pat, you have some knowledge about some programs in the U.S. Do they respond to David's concerns?
Well, I think David is partly right. However, Grameen Bank of Bangladesh, and particularly Muhammad Yunnus, thinks that microlending works any place in the world. So he was challenged by people like David. And so he runs a microlending project in the Bronx. You can go on Grameen.org and find out more about it. He does not lend $20 to $100. He lends $1,500 to $3,000 to women and to start up small startup projects. He has the same return rate. In fact, he has 99% return rate. And he's also starting this in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, why Omaha? I have no idea.
Really?
But maybe it's Warren Buffett that he's going to partner with. I don't know. But the idea is that he thinks that people in the United States want microloans. It helps them to get out of welfare, to start their own businesses, to be entrepreneurial, particularly in this time of high unemployment. He has, I think, 40,000 women in this project in the Bronx.
Where's this money come from? I mean,
and the money begins with the Grameen. The Grameen Bank is a for-profit bank, and they invest some of their money from the Grameen. Grameen has a foundation. The foundation lends, not gives. Nothing is given away. Lends money to get these startup ventures and gets paid back.
And we were talking to Mohammed Yunnus, who said, America had these huge debt problems, and in microlending he had none of them, and he said, I'm lending out very tiny amounts of money, but my repayment rate is fantastic. So he's made a profit during all this time when we've had such ups and downs.
We created a company to bring solar energy. Today, after about 16 years now, we sell more than 1,000 solar home systems per day. And we have over 600,000 solar home systems already operating all over Bangladesh. And it's a business, but business, again, to solve that problem, is nobody is making personal money. So we created something like 50 plus companies like that. And then the question comes, why do we create companies when we don't make money out of it? People ask us. I said, because we solve problems. Because they said, no, business is supposed to make money first. I said, if I don't want to make money, how can you force me to make money?
Kim, we have another question. Your name, please?
Hi, Kim. I'm Jessica. I am wondering about a criticism of microlending.
Sure.
In your response, which would be that the system tends or may imply that it is those in poverty that are responsible for lifting themselves out of their condition, sure, and ignores kind of the systemic issues, injustice, racism, and some of the societal issues.
Right.
That's a very interesting question. Thank you, Jessica.
Well, the interesting part about microlending, particularly in very corrupt countries, and I can't exempt us from that, is that it works under the radar screen of government. Right. And so that it avoids many of those problems. It doesn't depend on the government at all, so it helps people to be independent. But it works absolutely avoiding all government, all corrupt, and then it avoids corruption. So it could be very successful in that way. But the idea of it is to, and particularly countries where they don't have any welfare system, of course, it brings people out of poverty. In our country, it's the idea of helping people to be self-sustaining rather than depending on welfare.
Almost every country in the world now have microcredit program. Some of the programs didn't work. There was a big controversy. It won't work in the United States. People are different. And I always said that, look, people are same anywhere in the world. These days, people are people. They react the same way, same opportunity they get excited about. It's a question of how you do it. So it's not the fault of the people, it's the fault of the people who are doing it. If something doesn't go right, don't blame the people, blame yourself. You didn't know how to do it.
I live in a town where we've just started a program, and I believe it's called Consumer Credit Corporation, something like that. And they are working sort of in tandem with the Small Business Administration and local banks, some of the local smaller banks. Now, in order for you to be able to get a loan, you have to go through, I believe it's a 16-week training program, and you must graduate from it. And this is everything from teaching these people accounting, marketing, management, employment opportunities, and so forth. So it's a very, very strict way in order to be able to get some money. And so I think that it's not microlending in the Bangladesh or Haiti sense of the word, but it is there. And I think it can work with some moderation in the western part of the world just as well as they can in developing countries.
And there's a group of women called the Women's Initiative, started in San Francisco, it's now moving to Chicago, and they have exactly that same program. Right. And you take the 18-week course free, and then you get some startup money, and they have an 80% success rate over a 5-year period in San Francisco.
Kim?
Again, women.
When people are living in poverty, they often do not feel that they have access to those government resources. And so maybe it's from corruption, maybe it's simply because they feel that they don't have a voice or they don't have access because of a lack of education or literacy. Right. Often people don't even have access to the banking, the traditional banking structure, because they don't have, they can't sign their name. Right. And when you cannot sign your name, you can't open a bank account. And so when they don't have access because of those reasons, this might be the only way that they can begin to move out of poverty. So this is simply an alternative, not a replacement.
Yeah, and a lot of the people that we met with when we did the original investigation had to sign by putting their thumb print on things because they didn't write their, they couldn't, they did an X, but the thumbprint thing amazed me because I who knew that was a way to sign a document? As we've seen before on the show, poverty is an interrelated system with many contributing factors. Some of the most basic needs, such as access to health care, are problems we struggle with here in the United States. Healthcare in Bangladesh has become such a monumental task that organizations have added specific assistance to try to generate healthcare systems. Take a look.
When poor people in Bangladesh get sick, it means no more income from their factory job or farm. Government hospitals are too far for most rural families to reach, and often poor families are denied access to care due to bureaucratic problems. When the breadwinner of a family becomes ill or contracts a disease, the family's income is reduced or frozen. The whole family may suffer without food, clean water, or housing as they go into even more crippling debt. This happens all the time with easily treatable diseases. But the breadwinner's illness is not the only critical problem poor families have. Often, a large amount of money is required to treat children, pregnant women, relatives, and others, which prevents families from overcoming their poverty. Doctors, paramedics, and healthcare workers rotate facilities to cover large areas. Poor families pay for services by registering for a sliding scale insurance program based on their poverty level. It costs about 50 taka, or 30 cents, per family per year, and families are covered for up to 70% of all their medical costs. Many of these fees are waived entirely.
It may look like from that video that the healthcare is government sponsored, but it's actually not.
In fact, the healthcare that you see on the screen was done by the Partners for Sustainable Development, and most of the microlending institutions in Bangladesh then also try to fund these clinics as well.
Right.
But it's loans. It's not free clinics, and everybody has to pay a little bit. But these are all, and there are never enough clinics. They're never enough to even serve the villages that are microlending. So that's one of the challenges, is how to expand this healthcare. But it's all private organizations. The government really does nothing in healthcare.
Yeah. Laura, did you have a question?
I do. Can you say your name, please?
Sarah. I was curious, here in the United States, we pay taxes, and a portion of that tax goes to government healthcare for those in need.
Right.
So why can't the government in Bangladesh or in whichever country has this poverty problem, why don't they have a tax program or some sort of program with allocated funds for government-assisted healthcare?
That's a really good question.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, it's just very simple. They don't have any money.
Yeah.
These governments have no money at all. And so they don't have any money for health care. And so they may even have a health ministry, although very questionable, but they have no money. And they're talking 160 million people in Bangladesh, and they can't even begin to think of how to do health care in that country.
But then, Pat, what is the answer? Because really, we have countries, and Bangladesh is just one of them.
One of many countries.
And so we have countries with millions of people living in poverty.
With no health care.
And poverty creates a vicious cycle where we are likely to have more health problems. And those health problems are costly. And so where are these people to go? And you just explained that they have to pay then for their health care, which is going to throw them deeper into poverty. So what is the answer?
But they pay, they pay $6 a year.
Yes, but that is very costly for them. I mean,
for a whole family? No, not if they're under microlending. That isn't so costly.
There are people who cannot pay, and what we'll see shortly, cannot even pay for their children's education, which means that their children are not going to get out of poverty, and then they aren't going to pay for their own health care, and they're often not even going to pay for a meal a day.
So what you're pointing to is this idea of the interrelatedness of all this
health,
poverty.
education, and poverty.
Health, education, poverty, and then these people are walking or driving very far to get there, so you get sick.
It causes more health problems.
It causes more problems, so you get sicker by the time you get to the health.
I'm saying I don't see the way out. I do kind of, but I see
exactly the way out, because the more loans you have, the more microloans you have, and the more cottage industries, the more money people have, and then they're able to have the insurance, and that then helps, as the loans get paid back, that helps the non-government organizations to open more clinics, and so there's this really avalanche effect. Starts with a little tiny snowball. And so because the government is not going to do anything in Bangladesh for a very long time.
But it's access to capital.
It would be lovely if it did, but it doesn't. And they could tax people, but there's no money. What are they going to tax them on?
Well, shouldn't we try and impact the government a little more forcefully as well?
No, because
do that.
Absolutely
not.
But there's this thing called autonomy and national interests. I think that would be insane.
No, not we, but we could.
Who?
In the next segment, couldn't we impact the next generation of leaders so that they are more responsible government leaders?
If we pay them a lot of bribes, yes.
No, more. We can educate for the next generation of leaders and make them more responsible leaders in Bangladesh.
But that's going to take 20 or 30 more years.
Or 14.
I don't mind the investment. I think, but this idea of giving people capital, even a little tiny bit of capital,
lending people,
for finding access to it, would give them fix most of what we're talking about.
That's what's going on right now.
Right.
Yes.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
It's a 20-year investment, but you're willing to make that investment.
Well, I am. Education. It's the answer to everything.
Right now, there are about 52,000 students in medical schools, engineering schools, universities with the education loan from Grameen Bank. One of our objectives was to make sure the children of these families don't repeat the same thing their parents have done and their forefathers have done. So there should be a break in their whole journey in terms of education. So we succeeded in having all the children in school. This is part of Grameen Bank's job, so it's not casually done. It's a very serious part of our work. Then these children are growing up and going into higher education. Then this becomes expensive. We provide the financing so that nobody stays away from school because they don't have the money.
I think that it's a holistic approach.
Of course, yes.
That you have microlending.
Right.
And that we help to inspire entrepreneurship so that then we can inspire and impact the economy. And then we also need to look at education, because education is going to allow that cycle effect so that we can also impact leadership.
That's why we're studying this one NGO, because that's what they do. They not only do microloans and cottage industries, they have schools, as you'll see, and they have healthcare clinics, and they try to educate the whole person.
Evidently, we have another question. David?
Yes, David again.
Hi, David again.
Do you think that we should be allocating our capital overseas and to other countries when we have so many problems here in the United States?
In the United States, that's a good question.
That's a very good question.
So people who are thinking about loans, should they go overseas?
Well, we're talking about such small loans that I don't think that yes, I do, because we're all part of a global system. We're not just, unless we want to be isolationists, which we could be. We worked on that before. We got pretty much an F in that, but we could try it again. I don't recommend that. But we're all part of a whole global system, and it matters in Bangladesh, because if you raise the standard of living there, guess what they're going to do? Buy stuff. Yeah. And that'll raise the standard of living then for everyone. So yes, I do.
And I think people pay back money there just as much as they pay back money
here. These are loans.
So if they pay back a loan there and it's a 98% repayment rate, why not invest your money there? I mean, it seems like a good idea.
So do we only offer microloans where there's a very high rate of repayment?
I think we do. I mean, if you're asking me, I know it sounds selfish, but I think we do. I think it's a business.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean,
you're not helping people if they're not paying back money.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
People.
microloans by themselves might not always be enough to remove a family from poverty. In this case, the institution we're looking at, PSDI, strengthens their solution to poverty by including other strategies, including schools for young children.
Like
Take a look.
My name is Poppy. As a child, I did well in school until 5th grade. Most people go for 9 or 10 years. But because I am a girl, there was no money for me to continue. I was 13 when my education ended, and my father arranged for me to marry a man from another village. I was born and raised in Nojipur, but had to move here to be near my husband's family. We live across the field from the development group, and I am grateful for their facilities. Because we found this place, my children can go to school. If my daughter can go to school for 9 years, then I think my life will be complete.
Arif is a boy who attends a PSDI school. Arif can go to school and practices singing. He's the best singer in his class. One of the criticisms of microlending is that although it helps people escape poverty, it does not offer them the resources to maintain independent economic stability. While education doesn't solve the problem entirely, it gives future generations a better chance to continue their parents' progress. Children enroll in the centers to complete a 2-year course that covers preschool and grades 1 and 2. To date, over 52,000 children have graduated from these centers and transferred onto government schools.
তোমাকে ভালোবাসি আমি কিছুতেই ভুলতে পারি না।
Arif hopes to become a professional singer one day. With the skills he's learned at school, he can pursue a career and create a successful, stable life. Arif and his classmates are now part of a system that was once solely reserved for families with money. PSDI's child development centers aim to help these children form the foundation for Bangladesh's future economic growth.
That's a love song, by the way. And I know, what's not to love about this guy? It's just adorable. Do you want to talk a little bit about schools?
I do want to talk about the schools. Though.
All right, schools.
Even in rural Bangladesh, there are government schools, but the problem is they're usually 3 to 5 kilometers away from most of the villages.
Right.
And there are thousands of these very, very small villages. And so, again, PSDI has started these little tiny grade schools in the community. The whole community builds the school. You saw it has a dirt floor, grass roof, and then children's, kindergarten, we would call it, and grades 1 and 2 go to those schools, you saw them sitting on the dirt floor with those little books. And the clothes, of course, you know, all come from welfare agencies. So you see someone in a ballet outfit, and then someone in something else, and someone with a college sweatshirt on. So the clothing is fantastic. But anyway, they go to school, they begin school there, and the idea is once they get into school, then their parents, who then will have microloans and be a little financially better off, will send them off to the government school. And they have been very successful in placing most of the kids that you saw here in the free government schools.
And just to say, this school was not a government school; it was a PSDI
yes.
provided
school. I think
school.
I said that. Yes.
Yeah, you did. I just wanted to hammer it home, I guess.
All right. Good.
I think some of the challenges in countries around the world for people living in poverty is that in most countries at that level of poverty, schools still cost money, and people have I was going to say a strange perception, but a perception that they think is logical, that people only value things if they pay for them. Yeah. And so they will charge maybe $25 a year, US dollars, and they'll charge for schools. And governments, foreign governments believe that you need to pay for something in order to find value in it. And so they will charge still a small amount for schools. And people doing research, there's a woman at something called the Poverty Lab named Esther Duflo, and she has gone out and done research, empirical research, to show that you do not have to actually pay for something to value it, and you can value it intrinsically, that education can be recognized for its own value. And so she has shown that if you remove the price of school, parents still, and parents in the audience or viewing, you would still value that education. And so she's removed that barrier in many, many countries, including in Bangladesh, and convinced the government in some schools to remove that cost barrier. So the process of schooling is very difficult.
Very important, absolutely critical.
It's really vital. And then, you know, on top of that, often your teachers only have about a 6th grade education themselves. So the cycle just continues to repeat. And I had challenged Pat earlier on the role of education in creating leaders for the next generation. But if you're only being taught by someone who has a 6th grade education, how do we then expect leaders to be leaders?
Well, and if anecdotally, if you look at the kids that were lining up for school and getting ready, all the people lead, the kids lead the other kids, the older kids lead the younger kids. The girls were all in leadership roles in that school. And you just see this potential that will unfortunately hit a stopping block at some point.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. If we've got the 20 to 30 year investment of time Laura's talking about, then we'll fix it.
Be there with me, dude.
I'm happy to help. I'm happy to help. Let's look at the bigger picture.
When we visited Bangladesh, we found almost half the population of the United States placed into something about the size of Iowa. In rural areas we visited, poverty was not something they saw on a daily basis. If, for instance, they woke up and had access to drinking water, some food, and were not desperately sick, they were what they called good. To them, poverty was seen as a lack of work or a lack of dignity. Poverty to many people was seen as not being useful to the other members of the village community. Poverty was often used as a synonym for shame. Could microlending work in the United States? Maybe, maybe not. We really won't know until we try for a while. Any idea takes time to catch hold. Talking about what we found with Muhammad Yunnus, I realized that he is truly a man of vision. He saw a beggar and realized that they could be made into a productive member of society with the correct guidance. And then he made that happen. One man doing one thing with big results. What the interrelatedness of poverty means to me is that we are no different from the poor. There, but for the grace of God, goes me. Never, never say never.
Laura, what do you think the message really is?
I do believe there's a strong message. I think that each of us can have an impact on people living in poverty, and yet I believe it's more of a holistic impact. I think that we can change people's lives both through microloans as well as through education, through leadership, through that vision of hope that we were discussing.
Absolutely. Pat?
I think we can also help people by engaging in microlending ourselves, because we can make a huge difference with just $50, $100. You're changing someone's life, and it can be enormously productive and really worthwhile. There are many sound microlending institutions. There are a few that are not so good, but there are a lot that are very sound and worthwhile.
Right. Laura, what should people do watching this do?
Kim, there are 4 direct actions that you, Kim, and you, the audience, you, the viewers, can do to impact the lives of people living in poverty. Number 1, make people aware of opportunities through education, through your voice. Give them hope, give them optimism. 3, create realistic and achievable goals. And 4, as Pat just said, lend money. It can be as low as $10, $15 through reliable micro-lending institutions, which you'll find on our website. These are standards in our daily lives, which we do all the time, but they are true luxuries in the lives of people living in poverty. Sometimes all you have to do to create these opportunities for others is to offer your voice to allow others to be heard. Thanks, Kim.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's big questions. I'd like to thank everybody here for being our audience, for contributing. Thank both of you. Thank everyone in Bangladesh. Everyone, thank you for being part of the conversation. We've asked some big questions today, and we have some big ideas. Now it's time for action.